You mentioned the Kursk region. I can't help but ask a question on the agenda. You recently said that Zelensky would never have decided to invade the Kursk region without an order from the United States. What is the West trying to achieve with such actions, as well as pumping Ukraine with new weapons and mercenaries? And also, there are reports in the press about the supposed replacement of Zelensky. If this happens, will negotiations with Kiev be possible? As for what was the goal of those who organized the provocation in the Kursk region? The invasion of Nazi units with a large number of mercenaries. And maybe not mercenaries, but career military personnel. Foreign speech was already recorded there. It is difficult for me to judge what the plan was in this situation, because our Western colleagues have very sophisticated brains. They sometimes turn everything in their own way. Then nothing good comes of it. What was their plan for invading Afghanistan? Destroy the terrorists. How did it end? It ended in failure and a shameful flight. What was their plan for invading Iraq? To destroy weapons of mass destruction. It turned out that it was not there. By the way, the Iraqi leadership and the Iraqi parliament have been asking the Americans to withdraw the rest of their armed contingents for several years now. But the United States, as a country that respects the sovereignty of independent UN member states, does not want to leave. In the end, the Iranians will still ask them to leave, or Libya. The Westerners destroyed a state that was the most prosperous country in the region in socio-economic terms. This is almost free gasoline, free education, including abroad. What has happened to Libya now? Therefore, what goal they set and what their plan was, it is very difficult for me to say. But now political scientists are discussing it. And even Zelensky says that sometimes he makes Freudian confessions. He said that they would need it for subsequent exchanges, that he would gather prisoners and seize square kilometers. This is quite simple-minded and naive. We do not discuss our territory with anyone. We do not negotiate about our territory. We were ready to negotiate to stop the criminal actions that the Kiev regime took after the coup. It began to bomb its own cities because the residents of these cities refused to recognize the result of the coup. And the residents of these cities rebelled against a decision of the militants who came to power to ban the Russian language in all spheres of life. They were declared terrorists. In order to stop this, we were ready to negotiate. We conducted these negotiations. They ended with the Minsk agreements, which, as you know, this has now been publicly announced, no one was going to implement. They needed to buy time so that the Nazi regime, which continued to strangle everything Russian, could pump up weapons for a war against Russia. To protect the rights of these people, to protect history, the heritage of their ancestors, their language, their religion and culture. We were forced to recognize the DPR and LPR and stand up for them in accordance with their request, in accordance with Article 51 of the UN Charter. But until that moment, we were ready to negotiate. We supported the negotiations that in February 2014 led to the signing of agreements between Yanukovych and the opposition. These were also agreements that the opposition broke the next morning and staged a bloody coup d'etat. If those agreements had been fulfilled, Ukraine would now be within the 1991 borders that Zelensky dreams of. Crimea would also be within these borders if there had not been a coup d'etat. If a year later, in February 2015, the Ukrainian leadership and France and Germany that supported it had fulfilled the Minsk agreements, then Ukraine would again be within the 1991 borders, but for obvious reasons without Crimea. Moreover, if in April 2022 Ukraine had fulfilled what we agreed on in Istanbul, and if it had not listened to Boris Johnson, who forbade it to do so, then Ukraine would now also be within the 1991 borders, but minus Crimea and minus a significant part of Donbas. Each time, the Ukrainians have proven their complete inability to negotiate. Each time, the West has proven that it needs Ukraine only in order, as they believe, to hurt Russia, to irritate Russia and to fight against Russia. Therefore, the West does not need all these agreements. Each time, when the agreed documents were sabotaged, Ukraine lost more and more. And our president touched on the topic of possible negotiations a year and a half ago. He said that we are not against negotiations. It was a long time ago. I think it was 6 months after the start of the special military operation that he said that we are not against negotiations. But those who are against negotiations should understand that the longer they drag it out, the harder it will be to reach an agreement. In Istanbul, less than a month after the start of our special military operation, compared to what we see now, it was very easy to reach an agreement with us. They did not want this because, as they believed, they had not fully achieved their goal to constantly weaken Russia. So, I am sure that there is nothing to even talk about the Kursk region. About everything else, our president said on June 14th, speaking at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, that we are ready to resolve the situation based on realities on the ground. The Russian constitution clearly states that in addition to Crimea, we now have 4 new subjects of the Federation, the DPR, the LPR, Zaporozhye and the Kherson region. And of course, with all this, there can be no talk of Ukraine joining NATO. This is not just some red line. This is impossible, and those who are trying to impose something on us, like, let's leave Ukraine, what it has now, let's take these remnants into NATO, and everything will be fine. Well, this is what dreamers and provocateurs say. Therefore, our position is clear. That is, if these conditions are met, a return to the topic of negotiations is possible in principle. Now we do not talk about any negotiations when someone asks us these questions. We are already tired of repeating ourselves. Our president has repeatedly said that those who make some statements, they hint that Russia is allegedly pushing away negotiations. And Ukraine is ready for them. Putin has said many times, at least tell your Zelensky when he is in his right mind. If such situations happen on some day of the week, so that he cancels his decree prohibiting negotiations. In the last speech of the same Borrell, when the ministerial meeting of the European Union was held the other day, he again said that there is no other alternative for negotiations except the Zelensky formula. Well, listen, I thought that they had at least some education, that they had at least some understanding of how to conduct policy based on reality. This is a dead end, it is clear that Borrell probably now wants to go down in history as the main Russophobe in Europe. He is leaving his posts, but either this is amateurism or it is simply madness that has replaced the minds of diplomats and politicians in the West.